morning, please turn with me to Romans, the 16th chapter, as we begin to close out the book of Romans. Actually, let's consider the title, even though who is going to come up, God willing, in our questions. Let's consider the concept of why. Why? As we are only going to spend a little bit of time in Romans 16, but then going back through some old covenant stories to get a better understanding of why it was last week when we looked at that whole concept of boundaries and distance. Why Paul might be encouraging us to establish healthy boundaries in certain places. Going back to that passage in Romans 16 where it warned, famous kind of downer warning at the end of all those greetings he gave, I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you have been taught. Avoid them. And that sounds like just shunning. And one of the reasons why I wanted to go back through is because if we just leave it there, it sounds like just shun people. And if you've lived for very long, you know what it's like to be on the short end of being shunned. It doesn't feel very good. However, there is a purpose that God has in us creating healthy boundaries behind that whole concept of, like we do see in the New Testament. There are times when we're supposed to shun certain conduct, and if it gets to a certain point, certain people, so that repentance can be something that is more in the forefront of their minds. But there are deeper whys to what Paul is saying here in that whole concept of avoidance. As God willing, you will go back with me through some of those old covenant passages that help us understand why. As we turn to Deuteronomy 13, and consider the end result of why Paul really gave us that whole concept of avoidance as an issue at the end of Romans 16. We also talked about that concept of what's the real motivation. He said the thing to avoid is those who create divisions, those who create obstacles, but the real motivation has become serving their own appetites, something he's going to say as we get to Philippians. But one of the things that we said is over time, habits unchecked create entire personalities that have become estranged from God. And so as I mentioned in recent weeks, that whole concept of worthlessness, one of the reasons why it's so important to understand the red flags for why Paul is saying it is really important to understand times when we have taken a step off of the path so that we can get back into a healthy relationship with God is because the end game of some of these things, or the end result, is a lifestyle that God may actually consider worthless. How do we know? Well, in Deuteronomy 13, round about verse 12, he is going to be talking to the people of Israel in part about idolatry. And there are three groups of people he's going to say may potentially fall into the trap of idolatry, leading the entire nation to potentially fall into the trap of serving other things. Verse 12 beginning, if you hear in one of your cities, which the Lord your God is giving you to dwell there, that certain worthless fellows have gone out among you and have drawn away the inhabitants of their city, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which you have not known. He is then going to go on to talk about how they are to deal with it. But it is within a pattern that goes back to verse 1, where he's going to say, if a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder that he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, let us go after other gods which you have not known, and let us serve them. The term is going to come up over and over again. You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. And then finally in verse 6, not finally for the chapter, but finally for the observation that stood out to me, at least this week, it's going to read, if your brother, the son of your mother, or your son, your daughter, or the wife you embrace, or your friend who is as your own soul entices you secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, some of the gods of the peoples who are around you, whether near or far from you, from the one end of the earth to the other, you shall not yield to him or listen to him. And he is going to go on to talk about how you are to respond without pity. Part of the difference between the old covenant, though, and the new covenant, though, is he does not call us to kill in response to behavior that causes us to stray, or we've talked about in recent weeks, to water down the things that God has told us to do. But there are a couple of things to observe as we, God willing, take little pit stops along the way in the Old Testament. The first thing that caught my attention is that word that I emphasized at least 3 times, as he is talking to those who might have heard of a place afar off, a city where someone has called them to go serve other gods. That is a concept where he is once again going to pick it up. Even if it's a prophet, a favorite preacher that is causing you to serve other gods, or even if it's close family members who are calling you to serve other gods. And that is the thing that began to help me connect our current condition to that whole concept of idolatry. It seems weird because I don't see very many people who are tempted to bow down to blocks of wood or idols of metal. But one of the things that we can be tempted to do in our personal lives is, as we had mentioned before, compromise our integrity to fit in different situations. That's the part we've talked about before. But one of the things he is asking us to do is to consider the lengths to which we need to go to make sure that in trying to find friends, family affiliations, or even times when you're moving into a different situation and you're just really trying to find your fit, when he is cautioning us about needing friends or family or affirmation, one of the things he is telling us is super similar to something that Jesus is going to say in Luke 14, when he says, count the cost of your discipleship. Count the cost of your discipleship. No one is worthy of God if they have not first picked up their cross. And not only, he's going to say something that sounds odd. You've heard it before. You don't only have to hate your own life, you have to hate mother, father, so on and so forth, if you're going to properly focus on the things that God is asking us or really telling us to do. And why is that important? Why is that important? Well, because when you look at the fact that, as we've said before, sometimes when we have a thing stated in the word once, that's fine. But when you begin to have bookend concepts repeated in the Old and the New Covenant, not just the Old and the New Covenant, the Old Covenant in the law is where he states in the Deuteronomy. Jesus states it in his own ministry in Luke 14. And then Paul is going to emphasize it again. One of the reasons why it's so important is repetition, as we said, breeds concepts. And so when he is talking about that whole concept of being careful of the way that we allow our need for affirmation to cause us to shift our moral compass, to basically pick up on, I try not to dabble too much as an old man in slang. But the term that started to come up over and over again is this whole concept of pick-meism. And if you've ever heard of pick-meism, it's a term that's basically come around for young men. It used to be for guys. We would be described as thirsty if we wanted a young woman's attention so much that we were willing to do whatever it was to keep her around. Pick-meism is the flip side, because they said it doesn't just apply to men, but there are times, or women, or men, but there are times when a woman can want a man's attention so badly that she can do whatever she thinks is necessary to keep him around. And that's the fundamental of idolatry as we begin to apply it to our lives. Idolatry fundamentally is pick-meism applied to different areas of life. It is wanting to have somebody around so badly that the moral compass that God has given us starts to look suspect. Because as we said before, I can't see God. And there are times when it's easy for someone else to slide alongside of me so effectively that I begin to establish an emotional connection that, if I'm not careful over time, will have me turning my moral and ethical compass in a place that prioritizes loyalty to the relationship over my common sense. The things that mom and dad have taught me to do since I was yay high as I was growing up that I know are right. But that thing in the back of my mind and my conscience are calling me to compromise because my emotions have been, my emotional needs have been met by someone I don't want to compromise my standing with. And so one of the things he is helping us to understand is the way to avoid the way that pick-meism can cause you or twist your moral compass is to understand how in a healthy environment, if we just look at money again, before the whole concept of diversity became a loaded political term, if you went into a halfway decent financial advisor, they would tell you to diversify your investments. And so what he's saying in the nation is, if you have been tempted by pick-meism, loyalty has its limits. And one of the points of my culture shock, living here in the valley and living in different places around the world, is you have to really understand the role of loyalty in different places. And I didn't have a proper understanding of the role of loyalty here in the valley before I moved here. And so once I moved to the valley and I realized how much more important loyalty is here as opposed to the way it might be in other places, I started realizing why my conversations were missing certain people, because I didn't understand how important loyalty was to them. But God is saying there are limits to your loyalty, because if your loyalty to your favorite whoever, mom, right, dad, or somebody in a certain town but far off, they just sound like they got it really going on and got it right going together. And they just seem like their life is going so much better than mine. Heard of the whole grass is greener concept? You don't even have to know them. Their life just, social media much? They could just seem like they're doing better. And all of a sudden my values seem like they don't make as much sense as they did before I saw somebody else who seemed like they were doing a whole lot better than I am. He's saying, understand in those situations where your moral compass feels like it's flexible, that's a red flag for a sign that you need to recommit to that whole concept of where am I going for my guidance? Where am I going to get that emotional need met? And ultimately, is it worth the cost? Last week we talked about opinions. But it's not is it worth the cost of my opinions? Is it worth me pushing that thing that's going on in my conscience that's telling me to pause or maybe even stop? I'm going to stop there and then we're going to keep going. God willing, we're going to keep going. Next place, next destination. I got to look at notes this week because I'm all over the map, as usual. Judges, chapter 19. Judges, chapter 19. It's going to be important because, as we go to Judges, chapter 19, that whole concept of diversification is super important. It's because when Paul was talking about our need to create distance or avoid certain things, it doesn't require me to try to persuade everybody that, hey, guys, I think we might be going in an odd direction. I remember growing up, when we were out of school, I had some buddies who were making a certain investment, and they were trying to, pitch it to us, try to tell us why it might have been a good idea for us to invest in. And one of the reasons why we were able to stay friends, even though not everybody invested in that one thing, was because we were able to say reasonable minds can disagree. As a matter of fact, we all learned a little bit more on that whole concept of loyalty, is if our friends who are really loyal to us give us the freedom to make a different choice and let us see where the outcomes really fall out. And so that investment was back around 2006, 2007, when one of our friends wanted to make an investment in some property in Arizona that was financed by what we call an adjustable rate mortgage. Thank you. The laugh says it all. Thank you, right? Why is it that so many people aren't laughing? Why is it all the laughs came out of the people out of my age group and older? Because the adjustable rate mortgage was a way of financing your home that led to the 2008 crash. And we didn't fall out as friends because some of our friends said, I'm going to go that way, and the rest of us were like, but I don't understand how it works, so I can't really do that. Right? And so the beauty of it was even our friends who lost money didn't have it on their conscience that they drug us all into adjustable rate mortgages that ended up failing and having a lot of people having to start over in 2008, 2009. And we were able to respectfully disagree because we could say, you guys go that way, you guys go that way. Abraham and Lot. And Lot, if you need me, I'm there. And so with that, we got to see how loyalty has limits. The degree to which our friends who made the investment in the arms realized that if I just let some of the other friends go the other way, God willing, we all have it balanced out. Just like any good investment advisor will tell you, diversify your portfolio. Likewise, with your spirit and your friends, diversify your portfolio. Let your friends make different decisions as matters of opinion. And even if the matter of opinion really is on rock solid fact, the wisdom of Paul says just let them go. And God willing, life will bring you all back around in due time after God has had time to work in that situation. All right, Judges 19. That's the famous passage on Gibeah's crime. Round about verse 22, as he's going to talk about the young man who went to go chase after his concubine, going to a town in Gibeah after her. There's a gentleman who is nice enough to warn him, the town square is not where you want to stay overnight. So he takes him into his house. But much like a more familiar story, way back in the Old Covenant, a few chapters or a few books, this is going to turn out a lot like a story we've heard before. Verse 22. As they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows, that's our theme term, surrounded the house, beating on the door, and they said to the old man, the master of the house, bring out the man who came into your house that we may know him. And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, no, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since this man has come into my house, do not do this vile thing. Ultimately, we're looking at that very famous story. It sounds just like Sodom and Gomorrah, but now we're looking at how in the world, by the time you get to Ezekiel, he's going to talk about this again, or something similar. How in the world did the people of God become no better than the Sodomites, or the people of Sodom and Gomorrah? And the question becomes, once again, if you do not understand what Paul is cautioning you on in Romans chapter 16, over time, I saw somebody at a church I worshiped with long before I ever thought I was going to be a preacher, who I'm still connected with, had a great post on social media. And it's the old frog metaphor, where if you put a frog in a pot and you don't get so antsy that you turn up the heat sky high, you can just turn it up to maybe 1 if you got a 10-degree dial. And that frog's not going to do a whole lot. It's not going to jump. And then if you let it get to 1 and you turn it up to 2, that frog's still not going to do much because it adjusted to 1 and now it's adjusted to 2. And that meme or that thing said that you can turn that frog all the way up to the boiling point without it making a move because it adjusts by degrees to the increase in weirdness in the pot, right? And so that's what's literally happening with God's people. You don't think they know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? The question is, how did God's people end up no better than Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, I'm going to submit to you it was by degrees. Because the people of Gibeah were among the 7 nations they were supposed to have nothing to do with when they first settled in. But mercy to Gibeah turned into friendship with Gibeah, turned into, our term again, loyalty to Gibeah, to the point where when they were committing crimes, they didn't want to be left out. And so now their loyalty to Gibeah brought them into share in Gibeah's sin, and likewise, this was the last great civil war until the days of David, right? This is the last great civil war in Israel. And why is it important? Because once again, it's a bookend concept. As you go forward to the New Testament, you're now seeing why Paul says there's certain things we need to make sure that we start to create boundaries when you start to see these kinds of things popping up. Why? Because by the time you get to the Revelation, in Revelation chapter 18, God is going to say, do not partake in their sins, people. Why? Because if you partake in their transgressions, their shady ways, you're going to share in the consequences that are not designed for you. And so I talk about it like this sometimes. I've seen people when they get pushed to a certain point. It's called the straw that broke the camel's back. In law, it's a principle. It's called the thin skull rule. You don't get to pick your victim. And so as I look at these YouTube videos, every now and again you'll see people who have gotten in the habit of pushing folks. They used to call it the punch game, right? And they punch the wrong person. And it doesn't just end up in a viral knockout moment. They actually kill them because they did not realize how susceptible they were to the offense. And so likewise, that's what we're talking about in some ways here. You get to a point where the loyalty to the people who are not people of God becomes so severe that just simple things seem like they're normal. And here, the question to raise with your friends is, when you have a situation where you realize that your friends are willing to cross some boundaries that you aren't willing to cross just to get their needs met. Look at Gibeah. It's like, we all got needs, but really? We all got needs. But you're really willing to violate not just the woman, they wanted the man at first. Just to meet your needs, bud? And see, that seems like an extreme example, but it starts small. You learn a lot about your friends when you fall out with them and you realize the depth to which they're willing to go to get even. It starts in much smaller places. And so one of the things to thank God about is in your friendships and your more day-to-day relationships where nobody's talking about a gang rape. Let's just be honest with what they're talking about. What God gives you the chance to see is how low your quote-unquote friends are willing to go when they're upset with you. Because what God is showing you is a red flag for time when it's important to begin to consider creating distance. And so when you go back to that whole concept of what Paul is talking about in Romans chapter 16, don't always be upset when that friend that you thought you had who was super loyal, because loyalty is still a thing, when they stoop to some levels that you really didn't think they would go to. Because all God is saying is it's time to create some distance. As we'll keep going forward, Beyond Gibeah 2, 1 Samuel 2. Super close to where the reading came from this morning. So in 1 Samuel 2, beginning about verse 12. It's going to say, now the sons of Eli were, our theme word, worthless men. They did not know the Lord. The custom of the priest with the people was that when any of the men or when any man offered sacrifice, the priest servant would come and while the meat was boiling with a three-pronged fork in his hand, he would first thrust it in the pan or the kettle or cauldron or pot. All that the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. This is what they did at Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Moreover, before the fat was burned, the priest or the servant would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, give meat for the priest to roast, for he will not accept broiled meat from you, but only raw. And if the man said to him, let me burn or let them burn the fat first, and then take as much as you wish, he would say, you must give it to me now, and if not, I will take it by force. Thus, the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. That sounds like, what's the point? The fat or not the fat? Who cares? The bottom line is it's a boundary that God had established. That there were portions of the sacrifice that were for the priests, and there were portions of the sacrifice that were for God, and what they're doing here is they're taking God's portion too. And so that's the boundary that's being crossed. And the other thing that we talked about is, and this is by way of a review, when you start to see yourself in partnership with friends who have, much like Gibeah, boundary issues, it's time to start questioning whether or not it's important for me to start creating a little bit of distance. Why? Because the nuance here with Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, is really chilling by the time you get down to the end of not the chapter, but the section. So if we skip down to verse 22, Eli is going to step in, and even if it's not clear to us that his sons are sinning, it's pretty clear to Eli that his sons are sinning, and he's going to try to step in and do something about it, like we said around about verse 22. Now Eli was very old, and he kept hearing all that his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who were serving at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And he said to them, why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings from all the people. No, my sons, it is no good report that I hear the people of the Lord speaking abroad. If someone sins against man, God will mediate for him. But if someone sins against God, who can intercede for him? But they would not listen to the voice of their father, for it was the will of the Lord to put them to death. Verse 26. Now the young man Samuel continued to grow both in stature and in favor with the Lord and also with man. One of the reasons why it's so important to consider what Paul is saying when he is telling us to consider setting healthy boundaries is, we talked about it before, confidence can be deceptive. And so there are times when I can be persuaded by a person's confidence in persisting in a path that does not seem to sit well with my conscience and where I've seen God calling me to go. The danger is you do not understand why that confidence is in the condition that it is, or whether or not that's a thing from God. Pharaoh much? We talk about the two Pharaohs, the one under whom Joseph grew strong, and the one who, after Joseph died, grew very insecure about the growth of the people of Israel that continued long after Joseph was gone. And so ultimately, he hardened his own heart 5 times before God stepped in and did something that still gets me questions. I won't say to this day, but it's a common question. Is it fair for God to harden the man's heart and then condemn him? God didn't create him with a hard heart. He saw that the man hardened his own heart, and God stepped in and said, we are not going to vacillate back and forth according to your whim. At a certain point, you have made your choice, and now you're going to have to live with it. And so why does that matter? Did Pharaoh seem to lack confidence when he was telling the people of Egypt to oppress the people of Israel? No, he was the ruler. Just get it done. Likewise, Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's 2 sons. In God's eyes, they were growing more and more worthless, but it doesn't say that they were growing less confident. As a matter of fact, it's often an inverse relationship. There are times when the more confident I am, the less pleasing I am to God. We just got through talking about it in the adult class. Pride goes before a fall, and a haughty spirit before destruction. I got those mixed up maybe, right? But oftentimes, the more confident you see a situation, the more perilous it is. And that's what we're seeing here. These 2 young men have gotten in the habit of doing whatever they want. They can't listen to daddy, and they sure enough ain't listening to God. And Samuel is in the safest position because we don't know what his relationship is with them. But sometimes you are in the safest position when people are locking you out of certain situations because that's a situation that may be about to come into judgment. And so in circumstances where you are feeling the need for companionship, but as we talked about a few weeks back, you may see yourself potentially going through a friendship desert. Sometimes that friendship desert is the safest place to be because of what God is about to do in situations that seem completely stable. Oh, because the confidence level, you can't get any more confident than what you're seeing in a situation that God is judging. As we continue to go on, as we continue on. 1 Samuel, same book, chapter 25. Chapter 25. Maybe let's pick it up round about verse 9. The famous story of David and Abigail. It goes by way of the man we've mentioned before in talking about this topic, a man by the name of Nabal. David and his men, out of kind of the kindness of their heart, strong men, decided to defend a man's property without him asking. And in a time when they were in need and the man was feasting and quite possibly had leftovers, they just sent some messengers to ask for leftovers. The man Nabal answered them harshly, beginning about verse 9. When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David. And then they waited, and Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their master. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who come from I do not know where?" Bottom line is he's going to find out pretty soon, right? Because as you know, the story continues on, round about verse 20. Let me make sure I got the verses right. Oh, passed it by. Round about verse 18. His wife Abigail is going to step in when the servants are able to go to him in a way that they can, or go to her in a way that they cannot appeal to Nabal. And let's say around about verse 17. Let's pick it up where it says, "Now therefore, know this and consider what you should do. For harm is determined against our master and against all his house. And he is such a," our theme word, "worthless man that one cannot speak to him." Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine and 5 sheep already prepared and 5 seahs of parched grain and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, "Go on before me. Behold, I come after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. Go on, and well, you know how the story ends, and if you don't know, just go ahead and read it. Refresh your recollection. She saves a whole lot of people. Matter of fact, she saves everybody. And the thing to understand in situations where God is telling you that you have to consider, at least consider the need to start setting some boundaries, is he's not saying this is a passage that creates a habit for women to always disregard what their husbands say. No, that's not what the preacher's saying. But understand, it is wise for us to understand our audience. We talked about it before. And the consequences of what we are saying in certain situations. See, the servants realized the proper protocol. They tried to talk to Nabal, and it didn't work out. They go to Abigail, and they realize, as David is soon going to see, she is a wise and much more reasonable woman or partner in that situation. Abigail realizes that as much as she might want to tell Nabal everything, unlike that example we saw before, where my friends, we were able to stay friends because they were okay with not everybody investing in the same pot, she couldn't necessarily trust Nabal that way. And so if she tells Nabal there is a risk that he is going to, in his insecurities, require everybody to cut off David because, well, exactly. And if everybody cuts off David, the story has a chance of ending up a whole lot differently. And so while this passage may not be a license, right, to change the way that God has structured marriage, it is a call to realize the circumstance that you are in and to ask God for the wisdom to understand what you can and cannot share safely or reasonably and even more fully. Sometimes setting a boundary, it's not running away. It's not, like we said, not Old Testament killing folks. It's understanding that when you're in a situation where you have to be there, keeping secrets is not, like we said, it's not the prescription for marriage going forward. But even the unmarried, God knows, there's some things that you can't say right now that you might want to wait for the right circumstance to be able to present effectively. And even more importantly, there are times when you might want to let God be the one to step in and intervene. And that's what happens in this situation. See, she's not trying to deceive her husband as much as she's trying to save everybody there, like we said, who get wrapped up in whatever his motivation is, right? And what happens is there are times when I'm in my period of uncertainty. If you could see the icons or the emojis over my head, it'd be a great big old question mark. Why? Because I don't know how this is going to turn out. And I don't know how long I'm going to have to endure in this situation. And I don't know what Nabal's going to do if he found out I sent the stuff over there anyway. And so you want a picture of faith? Here it is. See, because we know how the story turns out. She saves everybody. But no prophet came to her to tell her she was going to save everybody. She just had to take a chance in a situation where she was dealing with a wall in a place where there should have been a reasoned ear to basically speak to. And so when you're going on in your own situations where God, through Paul in Romans 16, is helping you to understand places where you have to establish boundaries, it's helping you to understand that sometimes you got to move forward with that question mark on your head. And much like that friendship desert is a place you're going to have to go if you're going to basically have God save you from some circumstances. Now we're seeing another salvation metaphor where all you got is bad and worse choices, and you got to make one. And like we said, blind loyalty gets everybody killed in this situation. You have to understand whether or not Nabal is being more loyal to himself or to God, or just basic principles of human decency. See, sometimes I don't need to go back to the law to say, if somebody's been looking out for my stuff, free of charge, nothing in life is free. And this is one of the reasons why we can start to look funny to people outside in the world when we got to have the Bible to tell us, just treat people respectfully when they've been kind to you. Is that something we really need to be reminded of? And if we do, should we consider it weird when they don't want to come hang out? Because they still have that in mind. That still makes sense to even people who don't have a Bible. And if we don't even have that fundamental, why are we even trying to evangelize them? I get too excited. I know. I apologize. But understand, when Abigail is saving her family and her people, she's got to move forward with that question mark over her head, not knowing what's going to happen when she gets back. So we go forward to 2 Samuel, the 20th chapter. 2 Samuel, the 20th chapter. Beginning of verse 1. Now there happened to be a worthless man, our theme term,
whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite. That's going to be important. Or a Benjaminite. And he blew the trumpet and said, we have no portion in David, and we have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel. Nobody's going to listen to that guy. Oh, well, maybe. I don't know. Well, okay, verse 2. So all the men of Israel withdrew from David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah followed their king steadfastly from the Jordan to Jerusalem. Understand, that whole concept of a Benjaminite is really important. Who remembers why at this time? David's been through a lot. I'll take you through a little bit of the history. He's already been through fleeing Saul. Now he's the king. But now he's messed up. And like we said, there are times when my greatest enemy seems like it's out there. But once God subdues all my enemies, like we had folks reading from Psalm 18 last week, I still have to realize that sometimes my greatest enemy is my self, my inner me, right? And that's what David has just recovered from. The punishment for his sin with Bathsheba. And so now everything has calmed down and everything's good, right? Nope, Sheba. So that's where we are right now. When it rains, it pours. And so this is a time now when David, it seems like he's suffered enough. Well, God said stop. That's one of the things in life. One of the reasons why it's so important for me. God willing to listen to God to allow him to keep me out of certain situations. It's just like when David messes up with the census. And God gives him 3 opportunities or 3 options for what his punishment will be. 2 of them have him falling into the hands of man, 1 into the hands of God. Why did he say he didn't want to fall into the hands of man? People don't know when to stop. And the whole concept of proportionality is lost on people when we're given authority or power and all we see is, you mean I got permission to do this, God? And so that's what's happening here. Sheba doesn't know when to stop. And so what's happening is, in a situation where God has basically called off the judgment, Sheba is continuing to go. And is it because he's really interested in the things of God? Who are the Benjaminites? Who are the Benjaminites? Where'd the first king come from? Thank you, sis, you know. The Benjaminites were the people of who? Of Benjamin, yeah. They produced the first king, Saul. So now you're looking at old Hatfield and McCoy grudges. That's what you're looking at with Sheba. See, Sheba doesn't care what God thinks. He's still mad that Saul isn't king. So I'm pretty sure things were better when the Benjaminites were running stuff. And that's all this is. How do you know? Well, look at how it ends up. Toward the end of the chapter, please read it on your own time. But we have another woman coming in to save the day. How do you know? Rhonda, okay, listen, we need to read it so you believe me. Verse 16. Then a wise woman called from the city, listen, tell Joab after David sent the men out to go get him before he gets out of hand. Come here that I may speak to you. And he came near to her, and the woman said, are you Joab? He answered, I am. Then she said to him, listen to the words of your servant. And he answered, I am listening. Then she said, they used to say in former times, let them but ask counsel at Abel. And so they settled a matter. I am one of those who are peaceable and faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why will you swallow up the heritage of the Lord? Joab answered, far be it from me that I should swallow up or destroy. That is not true. But a man of the hill country of Ephraim called Sheba, the son of Bichri, has lifted up his hand against King David. Give him up alone, and I will withdraw from the city. And the woman said to Joab, behold, his head shall be thrown out to you over the wall. Wrap that up. And so understand, once again, in situations where I might have gotten into my feelings because I'm mad and my folks ain't in charge no more, I got to realize the limits of my power and my persuasiveness. I tell you before, I stole this concept from brother T.D. Jakes, who said, in life, you would be wise to be very careful to understand the differences between your confidants, your comrades, and I forget the third class of folks he describes. But he says there are 3 types of associations we can form in life. See, that first class of folks who I forget the name of, they're against what you are against. And so we can feel a certain level of kinship fighting together against a common enemy. But that is not the same level of camaraderie that you have when you are actually for the same cause. There's a slight difference, but you get to see it in, like we said, the issue of the Cold War. When Russia and America were against Nazi Germany, but they were just against the same thing. They weren't for the same things because when the Nazis were gone, what happened? They split and they started fighting. What we called the Cold War started right over again because they weren't for the same things. They were just against the same thing. And there's a difference. And he said, learn from world history. You're seeing the same things in your relationships if you're paying attention. That common enemy is false fuel for a relationship that's going to endure. And so likewise, he said, even having a common goal, something positive to focus your interest in, is false hope for a long-lasting relationship. Why? Because the only ones you can really trust in life, at least at that apex level, short of God, are the confidants. The people who, beyond sharing a common enemy with you, they'll likewise share common interests with you, hobbies and whatnot. They're the people who really want to see you win and succeed in life. And that's a completely different level. Because when the relationship goes south, they're still cheering for you. Going back to those friends I talked about at the very beginning. I don't want to curse any of my friendships because any friends I still got, I need. But one of the bases for longevity is the friends who, even when we disagreed about investment properties or something or other, we were still cheering for one another. And not just cheering, actively trying to see one another win. So, because I can cheer for you all day, but if I got it and I'm not trying to help you out, the Bible says, where is the love of God if I see my brother in need and I'm like, be warm and filled? So the question is, do you have confidants? People who are still cheering for you and actually working for your best interest even when you don't agree. And that's what he's talking about, challenging them to understand. See, because that's what Sheba got twisted. Sheba thought because he could persuade, he was very persuasive. Everybody in Israel is with me, and David ain't got nothing but his kinsmen left. We winning this one. I got this. Right? You've heard it before. The best odds in the room are you and God. And so that's why this book over and over again is trying to get you to always set your moral compass according to God. Because he's saying friendships with people, the odds that can be stacked either for you or against you, they're deceptive either way. Because the odds can be stacked against me and get me to quit in situations where God's like, don't quit, just get up. Or I can be so overconfident in a situation where I've lost track of God because I had the numbers on my side, running once again into the bitter judgment of God because I did the math wrong. And so understanding that, we'll go ahead and close it out. Going to 1 Kings 21. We don't really even need to read that one. That's Ahab and Naboth's vineyard. But for consistency's sake, let's just go to 1 Kings 21. As Ahab was upset because as much as he had, he couldn't have more, that being Naboth's vineyard next door. Jezebel's going to step up and take care of things for him in a less than healthy way. Chapter 21, round about verse 8. So she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with his seal. And she sent the letters to the elders and the leaders who lived with Naboth in his city. And she wrote in the letters, proclaim a fast and set Naboth at the head of the people. And set 2 worthless men, our theme term, opposite him. And let them bring a charge against him, saying, you have cursed God and the king. Then take him out and stone him to death. The verses that follow show them doing exactly that. And the last thing that came to mind, second to last thing that came to mind, as I started to realize realize the way in which these stories from the Old Covenant might connect to the wisdom of why Paul is telling us to set healthy boundaries in certain situations is the tragedy of this situation, of course, is Naboth getting killed for nothing just to get his property taken. But in life, going back to that whole concept of pick-me-ism, who's describing these individuals as worthless men? Is it God? Is it? It's actually Jezebel. See, she's got a job description. She says, for this job, I need worthless people. And so then when she sends the people out to find they know exactly who to go get. And so now you got two people in harmony. I need somebody who's worthless. See, not every job offering or not every job opportunity is extended to you because people see your value for the good. One of the reasons why it's so important to keep your moral compass in check is because you don't necessarily know what the motivations were for the people who wrote the job description. And so there are certain times when people are looking for you because they know or they trust you will not do the right thing. And that's who they're looking for. And with regard to these worthless fellows, you don't want to do too much with the Bible's silence, but it's not like they earned a place at the king's table because they were able to compromise themselves morally. They didn't elevate themselves by bringing Nabal down to the grave. They left their assignment still worthless. And in life, that's one of the last realizations that I saw for why Paul is saying there's certain things you need to distance yourself from because you don't want to get so into the habit of doing certain things that the first person people think of when they need something shady done is so once again, we're looking at that whole concept of loyalty. What does it matter? Loyalty is great, but what's it anchored to? What's it anchored to? And serving God can seem really cheesy over time, but he's saying wait on it like we talked about before because it's an investment that matures. Because you don't always see what's happening to your reputation in times when you are just so into pick-meism that you want to be accepted and you're letting someone else basically mold or shape your character into the type of person that people simply look for when they need something worthless done. And so understand when we're talking about this whole concept of Paul, talking about setting boundaries, it ends up, at least for me, you know I like sevens, and so I picked 7 examples. Let's end up in Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 19. Proverbs chapter 19, please. As it reads, beginning about verse 27. Cease to hear instruction, my son, and you will stray from the words of knowledge. Worthless witness, our key word, mocks at justice, and the mouth of the wicked devours iniquity. Condemnation is ready for scoffers, and a beating for the backs of fools. One of the reasons why I thought it was so important to go at least a little bit deeper into these terms that help us to understand, okay, the whole concept of avoiding, the whole concept of church discipline, the shunning has a value. Because one of the things in life you realize, that going back to that very first example, when he's saying you got to consider everything in your life and evaluate it for how it either is or is not in line with the things that God's telling you to do. Why? Because there are times when the separation is the only way that we can really have a healthy relationship. There are times, I'm using my family for an example. There are times when me and Mama didn't speak a whole lot. Because over the years, we didn't agree on everything. I've told you the example before. I had Mama riding in the car with my mixtape. I thought I had the clean version. Mama just got real quiet. She didn't get to rebuking. She didn't get to saying a whole lot. She just got quiet. I went back because I videotaped it. I was like, Mama, I'm showing you all the sights in Minneapolis, and you're not having a good time. I don't know why. And then I saw how, you've heard the story before our visitors, how what to me had become the clean version still had all those words in them. Oh, but it sounded clean to me. And all Mama could do was just get quiet. Right? And eventually God stepped in. And he helped me to see that my way had grown weird. And so likewise in life, there are times when you are the best thing you can do, as opposed to Mama just acting like Outkast was bumping. Sorry. It's to step back and let a person really interpret the silence
or the distance, and give God an opportunity to step in and work on their heart so that then maybe they can hear you. See, you're not doing that loved one a favor. When you consider the four loves, there are two of those Greek words for love. One is storge, and that's affection, and that's really what I'm talking about here. See, if I'm so needy for affection that I can't distance myself enough from you to grow agape. What's agape? It's that love that is not dependent upon emotions, but it's literally working out the best interest of all of us. And if I prioritize storge above agape, then I'm basically hindering our ability to grow collectively. And that's what you're seeing in this whole question of loyalty to what? If you can't go through the emotional pain of missing storge, everybody goes, wow, by the time you get to the Revelation, there's 7 letters, and I'm going to shut up. I know this was supposed to be, okay. It's a 30-minute lesson. Here we go. Here we still are. By the time you get to those 7 letters in the Revelation, right, you got 2 churches, just hold on, and you got 5 churches that need some work. We talked about how it's structured. The 2 outer churches, of Ephesus, the first, and Laodicea, the last, those are the ones that are warned. Your whole lampstand is about to get pulled. That means the whole church is about to. That's the warning. But inside of that, you have healthy unity. Smyrna, I think it is, and Philadelphia are 2 congregations that in unity, God is saying, just hold on. Because all of you are about to get a great reward in spite of the persecution that you were under. In the middle, there are some folks, 3 churches that have to make some tough choices that have to do with that whole issue of loyalty to who. Because he's saying, no matter what I see there that needs work, there are some of you who are holding on. And so that is what Paul is talking about. Before Christ comes in to the Revelation and says, this isn't just Paul. I've told you, the best times in my life were times when I say something I'm not completely sure about it, but God comes through and he provides his own endorsement in ways that no person could actually do that. And so likewise, that seems to be what Jesus is doing in the Revelation when he's saying, in an environment like this where part of a older man's culture shock is having to understand just how important loyalty is. I'm asking you to flip that. And when a new person comes in and says, I'm having culture shock on that principle, I need to get better there. Maybe take that as a call to, as Paul is challenging the Romans to, and this conclusion to Romans, in Romans 16, maybe ask God to help us reevaluate whether or not we've placed loyalty on too high a priority in relationship to things that God is calling us to, like truth and integrity and all those other things that God speaks about a whole lot more than he speaks about loyalty, as we together stand and sing.